The time is now for the Talk About Sports podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I'm in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. That Broncos free bet was quite the roller coaster last week.
What a disaster that game was. I mean, yeah, JT fumble while walking into the end zone, and that gave the Broncos life. But both these teams tried to give this game away. The Colts had 5 turnovers. Broncos threw 3 picks, but I think the nail in the coffin came from that pick 6 thrown by A.D. Mitchell to Nick Bonito. So that was one of the worst trick play endings I've seen in a while.
Yeah, we did not deserve to cover that one, but our best bet teaser, Bills plus 8.5, Commanders minus 1.5, was an all-time beat on the unlucky side. So it kind of makes up for the Broncos one. At no point was I concerned about that Washington teaser leg covering until the last minute. Somehow the Saints get the spike off because of a clock operator error. I think that was a little bit of home cooking in New Orleans there for just inexplicably pausing the game. And I mean, just imagine if the Saints had converted that 2-pointer and that kept Washington out of the playoffs this season with the loss. I mean, the NFL is lucky it played out the way it did.
Yeah, that's just not acceptable in the National Football League. But let's jump into our first segment here, which is the free bet of the week. And we are 17-9-1, dating back to last year. So what do you want to go with this week?
This week, we're going to do the under in Vikings Seattle. So the Seahawks remain alive for the playoffs here, 35% chance. And that means Geno Smith is going to gut through that knee injury that forced him out of last week's game. But I don't expect Geno to be at 100%, which is going to spell trouble against this Vikings complex blitz scheme.
Yeah, and Seattle's running backs have the 8th highest target share, so you think Geno's going to have to get the screen game going against this blitz.
Yeah, but the Vikings are second in EPA per target allowed to opposing running backs, so they've been great at letting opposing teams think they can get something going there in the check down and then having a guy available to rally and make the tackle. And then going deep against the Vikings isn't great either because they have the 4th highest cover 4 rate, and Seattle's yards per pass play against cover 4 is just 68% of their yards per pass play against other coverages, 30th relatively in the NFL.
All right, well, shifting to the other side of the ball, it looks like the Seahawks have a juicy matchup in the trenches.
Right. And I mean, typically, we're not super concerned about this Vikings offensive line, but they're already down left tackle Christian Darrisaw, and then right tackle Brian O'Neill banged up. He was forced out of the game twice last week. Now, I think he's going to suit up this week, but I don't think he's going to be 100% either. And then the left tackle they traded for to fill in for Darrisaw, Cam Robinson, ranks 8th worst in pass blocking efficiency. So I think this could be a pretty productive day for Boye Mafe on the edge. And then we already know, Minnesota's interior offensive line is one of the worst in the NFL going back years. And the Seahawks have one of the best interior pass rushes with Leonard Williams, with Jaron Reed, with Byron Murphy.
Well, do you think we need to worry about JJ taking over this game and, pulling it to the over on his own?
I think we more have to worry about Jordan Addison because I think that they're going to bracket JJ over the top. And then Tariq Woolen has been solid this year in coverage. He's probably going to shadow Justin Jefferson. He's 14th in yards per cover snap allowed. Now, where we go with this total, the main reason and handicap for this total is it's going to rain on Sunday in Seattle with decent winds as well. And that's going to make scoring conditions nearly 3 points worse than average by our numbers. Our model predicts a total of 40.9. Now, we're going to send this bet out to clients in just about 45 minutes as we record this here on Thursday morning. So I think it might go down to 43 after we send it. It's currently 43.5. If it goes lower than 43, if it goes down to like 42.5, I'd rather have first half under 21. So we'll score this based on the line when this podcast is posted Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern.
All right, well, let's shift it over. We got to talk about the Falcons, and they are in a nearly win-or-go-home game, and with their playoff chances would drop to 7% with a loss compared to 33% chance with a win. So we also have to talk about they are moving on to Penix, and you are actually one of the few people I heard make a case that this wasn't such a bad pick in the offseason. So I'm very curious to see how he handles being thrown in the fire here.
Yeah, and it didn't so much defend the pick, as I did point out that it wasn't as big of a deal as everyone was making it out to be because a rookie defensive player is very unlikely to affect your win probability by more than 2% per game. So that's, 0.3 wins over the course of the year. It's not huge. Everyone wanted the Falcons to take Dallas Turner, but I don't think he's really moving the needle on the pass rush. He's kind of just an auxiliary piece for Minnesota this year. Meanwhile, given what we've seen from Kirk Cousins' recovery, I think the Falcons are glad they have a backup option, right? It was dumb to give Kirk all that money. I'm not, crediting the front office for doing that, but once you had already done that, taking a quarterback when you're drafting that high is not a bad decision, because getting the quarterback right is the number one thing you need to do in the NFL.
Yeah, Kirk clearly just never recovered from his that Achilles tear in his ankle. So he had a league low 4% of his dropbacks from outside the pocket, and the only quarterback to move less than that in the last 9 seasons was 2017 Big Ben.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe Kirk with another offseason to recover gets better next year. I'm not sure where they go, but I think it's clearly the right decision right now to go with Penix. You mentioned the Falcons are not eliminated yet. They need to see if they can start getting wins starting this week in a favorable matchup, because the Giants have the 4th highest cover 1 rate, and Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson has been crushing cover 1 all year. 19% more yards per pass play against cover 1. They've got great matchups across the receiving game. Drake London leads the NFL in yards per route run in the slot, and the Giants could be down Andrew Phillips and Greg Stroman, their top 2 choices at nickelback. Now, they have Deonte Banks, who's taken some snaps at nickelback before, but they prefer him on the outside, so he's not going to be super comfortable in there, especially against Drake London. Then you look at it, the Giants are allowing a league-high 0.55 EPA per target to opposing tight ends, so I think this is a week Kyle Pitts can have some explosive plays. The number one option on the Falcons offense is Bijan Robinson in the passing game. And the Giants are 28th in EPA per target allowed to running backs. And Robinson also has a favorable matchup on the ground, because the Giants are allowing 4.9 yards per rush. So there's just great matchups all across the Falcons offense this week. I think this is the perfect time to put in your rookie quarterback and see what he can do.
Yeah, there's no shortage of weapons there. And to make things worse for New York, they're without interior defender Dexter Lawrence, and they could be missing edge rusher Brian Burns, who said his ankle got rolled up pretty bad last week.
Yeah, and Lawrence 5th in pass rushing efficiency, and Brian Burns is 13th in pressures. The pair is worth 2.8 points by our numbers.
All right, well, if we think the Penix is going to be at least as good as Cousin, and if not, maybe a possible upgrade for Atlanta's offense, why'd they go from being a 10-point favorite down to an 8.5-point favorite?
Yeah, I've seen some talk about this online. People saying, the market thinks that Penix is worse than Cousins. It's not that. It's actually the other quarterback in this game, Drew Lock, being named as the starter. And as we've discussed on this podcast, he's much better than Tommy DeVito and Tim Boyle. So when the Giants got hit, that was because Drew Lock is the starter.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, we are getting a downgrade in Cleveland. They're going back to DTR QB. So this is going to be his second matchup versus the Browns, as he filled in for Deshaun in that week 7 when he got injured.
Yeah. And the Browns are 29th in yards per pass play this season, and it's going to get worse with DTR. He has a career average of 3.1 yards per pass play. I mean, Thompson Robinson is 3.3 points worse than Jameis Winston, according to our numbers. Now, the Browns have a sharp front office. I think they've just decided to go into stealth tank mode under the guys that they're just giving the young guy a last look here. But I think the Browns know what they're doing. They're trying to lose games here. And how do you lose games? You don't start the highest variant quarterback in the league. You start DTR, who's not going to be able to move the ball at all, especially this week, because the Browns are starting backup left tackle German Iafetti, and he is going to be lined up across from Trey Hendrickson, who leads the NFL with 12.5 sacks.
Well, we've got another QB change, and the Titans are telling Will Levis to take a seat.
Yes, and this is an upgrade. So they're going to be starting Mason Rudolph this week, and, after last week's another awful turnover performance from Levis, he is down to negative 0.16 EPA per play on the season, while Rudolph is positive 0.04 EPA per play. So clearly the right decision for the Titans. They're fed up with Will Levis, and that might be his last start ever in Tennessee that we saw last week.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got stock up, stock down, and whose stock are you going to be buying this week?
I'm buying the pass blocking for the Commanders after New Orleans had a 20.5% sack rate on Jaden Daniels last week. Washington's offensive line was all out of sorts due to the late scratch of veteran center Tyler Biadasz, who ranks third in pass blocking efficiency and is important in communicating across that offensive line. Now, Biadasz will be back on the field this week, and he'll be lined up next to the Commanders' best offensive lineman, right guard Sam Cosmi, and the pair will contain Eagles interior defender Jalen Carter, who's seventh in pressure. He's the best player on that Eagles pass rush. So you've got two of the best Commanders offensive linemen to limit Jalen Carter. That's great for Jaden Daniels. He was only pressured on 28% of his dropbacks in the last game versus the Eagles, and that was actually below his season average. So this Commanders offensive line matches up well with this Eagles pass rush.
All right, well, whose stock are you going to be selling this week?
I'm selling Miami's offense after they averaged only 3.6 yards per play last week. And I'm expecting much of the same on Sunday because the defensive DNA is really similar between the Texans and the 49ers. DeMeco Ryans brought the same system over to Houston after he was San Francisco's defensive coordinator. So Tua had an 8% turnover-worthy play rate last week against Houston's defense with comparable edge rushing to the 49ers. Nick Bosa, fifth in pass rushing efficiency, is back. He was back last week after missing 3 games. And they also have Leonard Floyd, who's 12th in sacks. Miami is likely without both starting tackles, and left tackle Teron Armstead ranked 4th in pass blocking efficiency. He's worth a point to our metrics. In addition to Bosa, the 49ers also got back starting safety Talanoa Hufanga and starting linebacker Dre Greenlaw last week. And they're 7th in EPA per target allowed to opposing tight ends and 5th in EPA per target allowed to opposing running backs. Only going to get better with Hufanga and Greenlaw on the field. And the Dolphins have been their offense has been very funneled towards running backs and tight ends this year. In fact, Jonnu Smith has more targets over the last 10 games than Tyreek Hill does. And the Dolphins running backs are the second highest target share in the NFL. So I think it's going to be much of the same of what we saw last week, this week with the 49ers. And I think they have a great matchup getting guys back to limit this Dolphins offense.
Yeah, and to make things worse, Jalen Waddle, 4th in EPA per target. It looks like he's in danger of missing this game. But speaking of injuries, let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got the injury watch, and the big story is Patrick Mahomes' ankle, and he's just been getting absolutely abused out there the last few games. And we've also seen some crazy line movement here. People are trying to figure out what's going on. So the game opened Texans -2.5, and it's moved all the way back to Chiefs -3.5.
Yes. Yeah, and so, I mean, Mahomes took 11 hits last week. That's his third game in the row with 10 or more hits. And it's the 7th game in a row that Patrick Mahomes has taken at least 7 hits, which is tied for the longest streak since 2000. They tried Joe Tooney at left tackle because once DJ Humphries got hurt, they were like, we're not going back to Wanya Morris. But he surrendered 10 pressures across from Myles Garrett. It's not going to get much easier this week across from Will Anderson, who's 7th in sacks. So, I mean, Grant, you're a Chiefs fan. Why is Mahomes suiting up for this game? Make it make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but I think the idea of listening to Mahomes' press conference is if they win the next 2 games, then they'll have that extra long bye in week 18 and the first round of playoffs. So I kind of understand that, but it would just make way more sense in my head to sit out this game and then play the Steelers game.
Yeah, I mean, it's so risky playing 3 games in 11 days on a bum ankle. And like you were saying, I think you'd rather have 2 1-week buys than 1 2-week bye. I think this is really poor decision-making by the Chiefs organizationally if they're going to start Patrick Mahomes in this game.
Yeah, I'm just going to be sitting there with my fingers crossed that he stays healthy while we got Will Anderson just bearing down on that side. But let's move it over to the other Saturday game. And George Pickens was a DNP. Are you expecting him to be out?
I think he's going to be out again on Saturday. So Pittsburgh would like to run the ball, right? They have the second highest run play rate adjusted for situation in the league, but the Ravens are 3rd in EPA per rush allowed. And Russell Wilson has only a 38% dropback success rate in the last 2 games without that deep threat of George Pickens. So he's worth a lot to Pittsburgh's offense. And I'm not really loving the matchup for them this week because if they don't have Pickens, they at least, Arthur Smith has one of the best screen game architects in the NFL, but all-pro linebacker Roquan Smith will limit the pass catchers out of the backfield as the Ravens are 10th in receiving success rate allowed to opposing running backs. So, I mean, George Pickens, you could make the argument to me he's worth anywhere between a half point to Pittsburgh's offense all the way to 2 points. I mean, if no one else, Calvin Austin's there, but if Calvin Austin can't create an explosive play, or if Mike Williams can't create an explosive play for the Steelers offense, it becomes one of the worst offenses in the league without George Pickens, especially in this matchup.
Yeah, for sure. Well, looking at the Lions, they have 14 defensive players on IR after it was announced that cornerback Carlton Davis and interior defender Aleem McNeil were the latest casualties.
Yeah, and Aleem McNeil is 8th in pressures this year. He was one of the best players on that Lions defense remaining. And so, they already lost Hutchinson. Without McNeil, the Lions have led the league in blitz rate since they lost Hutchinson. It might only go up. So we're going to see a ton of cover one from Detroit, which is not necessarily the worst thing in this matchup because Chicago's offense is averaging a league low 75% of their yards per pass play against cover one compared to other coverages.
Yeah, and to make things worse, they also lost running back David Montgomery.
Yeah, so no Montgomery. That means it's going to be a healthy dose of Jahmyr Gibbs, who I think Jahmyr Gibbs fantasy owners will be pumped about because his touches, he could get 25 touches in this game. I don't know if he's going to be great as a receiver, though, because Chicago's defense is 3rd in EPA per target allowed to opposing running backs. So he's probably going to get most of his work on the ground. I think the Lions are more likely to hit those play action shots to Sam Laporta because Chicago's defense is surrendering a 59% success rate to opposing tight ends. That's 26 in the league.
Well, we touched on the upgrade for Tennessee's offense earlier, but on the other side, the Colts offensive injury report is not looking great.
No, I mean, they're missing the entire right side of the offensive line, and Denver's defense had 21 pressures last week on Anthony Richardson. And right guard Will Freeze was conceding just a 4% pressure rate, but his backup, Dalton Tucker, is allowing a 9% pressure rate, and he's going to struggle across from Jeffrey Simmons, the best player on that Titans defense. And Indianapolis is going to be without Alec Pierce, who has 10 deep receptions this season. His field stretching is worth 0.4 points by our metrics.
All right, well, looking at the Jets, their defense might already be checked out, but these injuries are definitely not going to help.
No, I mean, so they're going to be without starting cornerback Michael Carter likely, and Cooper Kupp, 2nd in yards per route run in the slot. Now, we didn't see that last week. He had 0 catches. I think it's going to be a big bounce back for Cooper Kupp, who would line up across from backup Kendall Sheffield. But an even larger loss for New York's defense would be interior defender Quinnen Williams, who ranks 3rd in pass rushing efficiency. He's nursing a hamstring injury, and Williams is worth 5 percentage points of win probability, according to our numbers.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got our DraftKings player of the slate. And who are you putting in your lineup this week?
Cardinals tight end Trey McBride has 116 targets without a receiving touchdown, but I believe this is the week he finds the end zone. It's a great matchup against Carolina's defense, who's 29th in EPA per target allowed to opposing tight ends. I think this is going to be a huge game for Cardinals tight end Trey McBride.
Yeah, I mean, you've got law of averages, but then also you got Kyler with the quote, 85 will touch the end zone soon. I promise. So, I mean, I heard that. I had to put a unit down on that one. But I
think Trey McBride anytime touchdown is a banger, and I think you've got to have him in your DraftKings lineup this week.
Oh, for sure. But let's shift it over. We got next segment here, weather of the week. What are you seeing out there?
Okay. We've got the Packers are 33-7 after week 10 hosting dome teams in the last 3 decades. And the reason is because it's frozen tundra up there, and the Saints are not going to be comfortable in the 25-degree weather with snow in the forecast.
Yeah, Jake Haener had only a 14% success rate in the first half of last week. So New Orleans made a change under center to Spencer Rattler, who averaged 0.45 EPA per play.
Yeah, I think it's safe to expect the Saints are going to stick with Rattler on Monday night as he goes against Green Bay's pass rush, coming off the 3rd highest pressure rate of last week. But I don't think Rattler is going to be able to combat that pass rush with the screen game because the Packers are 9th in EPA per target allowed to opposing running backs, and Alvin Kamara is nursing that groin strain. So I think the screen game for New Orleans takes a big hit if Kamara cannot suit up. And then Green Bay's defense is 3rd highest cover 2 rate in the NFL, and the Saints yards per pass play against cover 2 is a league low 78% of their yards per pass play against other coverages.
Yeah, and Jordan Love had the fifth highest success rate of his career last Sunday night versus Seahawks, and I think he has a chance to keep this momentum going, as the Saints might have lost another cornerback last week in Kool-Aid McKinstry, and New Orleans already traded away Marshawn Lattimore, so they were starting cornerback Paulson Adebo, and he broke his femur, and he's out for the year.
Yeah, so that's 3 guys down in the New Orleans secondary. Green Bay is relatively better against the standard pass rush than the blitz. The Saints have the 5th highest standard pass rush in the league. One guy remaining in the New Orleans secondary is cornerback Alontae Taylor, who's last in yards per cover snap allowed this season. I think he's going to take most of his snaps across from Romeo Dobbs. So if you want to get him in your DraftKings lineup or bet a prop over, that's probably a good move on Monday night. I think Carl Granderson is the best remaining player on this Saints defense, but he's going to be shut down by Zach Tom. And I don't even know if they're going to have to use the passing game because the Saints have such a terrible rush defense, 30th in rush success rate allowed. And the Packers are 10th in EPA per rush and have been pounding the rock with Josh Jacobs. I think they're going to use that physicality in the snow and send the Saints back to New Orleans. Our model doesn't quite get us all the way up to the 14 and a half we're seeing in market, but I certainly see why the Packers are getting hit here because all the matchup advantages are in their favor.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's shift it over. We've got our next segment here, which is our prime time preview. We've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Dallas Cowboys, and this Bucs offense has been humming lately.
Yes, and they made a little bit of a tweak as they kind of try and find themselves without Chris Godwin. They had a 10% 13 personnel rate, so that's 3 tight ends on the field in week 14, and they averaged 0.31 EPA per play in those in that personnel grouping. And then so they increased it last week to a 23% 13 personnel rate, and it might continue to increase on Sunday night because the flaw in this Dallas defense is at linebacker. So you want to get more tight ends on the field. The Cowboys are surrendering a league high 0.07 EPA per rush, and they'll continue to struggle if the Buccaneers go heavy, and they already have the 9th best rush success rate in the league. K. Dotton is Tampa Bay's best receiving option at tight end, and he'll have a favorable matchup because the Cowboys rank 27th in success rate allowed to opposing tight ends.
Yeah, and Bucs wide receiver Mike Evans accounted for 42% of their targets last week, but I think fantasy owners need to know, what is his role going to look like on Sunday?
I don't think he's going to get as many targets this week because Cowboys defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer can shadow Evans with Deron Bland, who's been pretty good since he finally made his debut 4 games ago. He's allowing only 0.83 yards per cover snap. And Dallas nickelback Jordan Lewis, 7th in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. He's been solid this year, but he's dealing with an elbow issue. Lewis said, "I'm a little banged up, but I feel like I can go out there and play." So right now I'm counting Lewis as in for Sunday night.
Yeah, and Cowboys pass rush has come to life with 6 sacks last week in Carolina, but they're likely going to be limited this week against Tampa because their offensive line ranks 2nd at pass blocking efficiency. But shifting over to the Cowboys offense, how are they going to match up against this Todd Bowles blitzing scheme?
Well, Dallas has been relatively better against the blitz this season. Cooper Rush has shown some composure back there, and I think the Cowboys are going to benefit from getting their starting center back this week, Cooper Beebe. He missed last game, but he's going to come back, and obviously you want your starter in there when you're going across from Vita Vea, who's 14th in pressure from the nose tackle position. And Cooper Beebe has been solid as a rookie, 8th in pass blocking efficiency.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our primetime prop. You are 22-13 dating back to last year, and I am still tilting about Jacoby last week. They literally forgot this guy existed until the end of the game, and he still ended up 2 yards short. I don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah, that was rough. It felt like he didn't even hardly get a target until the last 2 drives, and then he almost went over the prop as the Raiders almost won the game. That was crazy. Desmond Ridder had a shot to win that game. They were out of it for basically the whole night. But let's shift it back to this week. We're going to go with CeeDee Lamb under 71.5 receiving yards because Tampa Bay has the 2nd highest zone coverage rate in the NFL, which is the best way to contain CeeDee Lamb. Lamb is gaining 3.33 yards per route run versus man this year compared to just 1.91 yards per route run against zone. Todd Bowles is not going to give CeeDee Lamb any man coverage looks this week. And Dallas' yards per attempt against zone is a league low 83% of their yards per attempt against man coverage.
I like that pick. I think the lock is going to flip this week for the prop. But if you're looking for more content, head over to drbobsports.com, where you'll also find our college basketball service, and our best bets are 138, 111, and 1 for 55%. So as always, we will be back next Friday.